Hi.
Hi, Dana.
Hi, Aileen. All right. So welcome to Conversations with Two CEOs. We have a special treat with having two. I know most of you are used to seeing one. I'm Dana Pauly. I'm the Interim Executive Director for Leadership Montgomery. I also want to recognize our other members of our team who are on the call, Shannon Sicard, Allison McLaughlin, and Carmen Ford. And we also have some of our board members on the call as well. Mimi, Lawrence, Jean, Greg, Monica. And then for those of you who are joining us who aren't in one of those categories that I've already mentioned, you are also special, and we're also so glad that you're here with us this morning. So we are using this opportunity, this conversation with a CEO, to kick off a 4-part series that we'll be doing, looking forward, building better practices for a new reality. We recognize that we are still very much in a pandemic, but also recognize that we are getting resources and skills and opportunities that should help us to think about what the return to the workplace and things that leaders should be thinking about as they consider what their new reality is moving forward. So I'm very excited to welcome Jim Conlon with us this afternoon, and Katie Conlon. I will take a moment and read their bios, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Jim. So Jim Conlon is the owner and founder of Elysian Energy. Jim likes understanding how things work. His degree in biology focused on understanding the systems, scales, and patterns of life, while his professional experience as a consultant and contractor is focused on ensuring the environments we construct for ourselves serve us safely, efficiently, and comfortably. Understanding how things work used to be the hard part of the day. Then he started managing people and realized that groups of people are their own organism with their own systems, scales, and patterns. So reconciling the craziness of the COVID-19 pandemic with people's need for structure and certainty helped Jim develop a model for understanding where we are and how we might proactively chart a positive way forward for ourselves and our coworkers up and down the org chart. He wants to thank you for joining us for a presentation about where we were a year ago and how we can use the uncertainty around the coronavirus to make sure we're not missing an opportunity to be honest, humane, and productive within our new normal. Originally from Chicago, Jim spent his 20s performing stand-up, improvisational, and sketch comedy, and he currently spends his time in Silver Spring with his family. Jack, who's 6, Seamus, who's 3, Liam, who's 14 months, Katie, a gentleman never asks, and Gaia or Jaya? Gaia, almost 100 years old in dog years.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dana.
Before I turn it over to you, let me introduce your lovely bride. Katie Conlon is a coach, trainer, teacher, and consultant in the greater Washington, D.C. area and founder of the Phoenix Nest. Katie is passionate about helping people, groups, and organizations thrive, particularly during times of transition. Through coaching, training, and facilitation, she works with clients to build habits that will help them achieve their goals for a more vibrant and successful future. Her approach is framed by her expertise in positive organizational development, strengths-based leadership, resilience, and the science of well-being. In addition to her work with the Phoenix Nest, Katie works as a coach, trainer, and consultant at the Center for Leadership and Organizational Change at the University of Maryland. She is an assistant instructor in the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program, try saying that 3 times fast, in Applied Positive Psychology. She has developed curriculum for George Mason Washington. I have just lost myself. I'm going to do that one more time. Katie also develops curriculum for George Mason University Center for the Advancement of Wellbeing. She earned a master's degree in Applied Positive Psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree in Counseling and Personnel Services from the University of Maryland. Thank you for being with us, Katie. Katie also serves as a speaker for our Emerging Leaders program. Jim is a graduate of CORE 2016, and I'm going to turn it over to you now, Jim.
Thank you very much, Dana, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you here with Leadership Montgomery. It's been 5 years, and I've been didn't seem that long, and so I'm extremely grateful that LM is an organization serving our community, and that I'm attached to it, and I'm obviously honored to be with you all here today. I am going to try and share my screen here. And then once I do that, it's going to, let's see, Chrome tab. Forgive me, but you all should be seeing a presentation. Is that, you guys got my first slide up?
Yes, you're all good, Jim.
And you can hear, okay, excellent. So this is something, the image that you see here, I thought was telling, and it's known as Zeno's paradox. And the idea is pretty simple, is that to get somewhere, you have to get at least halfway there first. And it's really simple until you start thinking about it and you go, well, to get there, I need to get halfway there. And to get halfway there, I need to get a quarter of the way there, and so on. And the paradox is that you actually don't end up getting anywhere. But I'm using this exactly the opposite way, which is to say, wherever we want to get to, which is abstractly our new normal, we need someplace, we need to know where we're starting from, and then we need to move. And so the presentation here acknowledges that 2020 was extraordinarily awful in a lot of different ways. But as it pertains to our conversation today, I really want to focus on the sort of professional work-life balance, but really looking at it from civically engaged working professionals. And so I'm going to do a little bit of context setting in a moment, but I think it's extremely important, and Dana just spoke to this a second ago, that I feel like we're still sort of in the eye of a hurricane, which is to say, we knew, we had very little time to prepare for the pandemic, and we're still experiencing it. And that in fact leads to a couple of the agenda items we're going to start with, which is really just a couple of very simple models that I have found extremely helpful in sort of simplifying and making this the spider's nest of the coronavirus and the pandemic and our response to it, to make it a little less gnarly and make it something I actually feel capable and empowered to sort of dive into. And so we'll spend just a few minutes discussing these models, and then we're going to take a few minutes, 5, 10, this is 10 to 15 minutes, maybe about 10 minutes, about what my company did specifically in the first few months of the pandemic, and why that might relate to, it might be relatable for some of y'all. And then Katie will discuss some of the key concepts that she's using, and then I'll sort of wrap it up with sort of a best case, our best practices, case study, what we're seeing from the field, and you'll pick up why that might be meaningful for you because of the nature of our business, which really covers a lot of bases, a lot of categories of work types. But just to get started, please don't read the slide. The main purpose of this slide is to really give you a visual. And if you start from if you look at a clock, we're starting at about 11 o'clock, you'll see the number 1 and a term, pre-contemplation. And what this model explains is it gives people, it was originally developed for smoking cessation, but what it does is it gives people sort of a beginning, middle, and end to a change or transition, right? So pre-contemplation is we're not sure what's going on, or we're not thinking about whatever the issue may be, or concern or opportunity. Then contemplation, just going around the clock. That's all I'm doing right now. Then contemplation is, okay, we're thinking about it. Preparation is a little more specific than just, getting ready. It's really sort of getting ready in the next, 3 to 6 months, just to bring it into an office or a professional sort of system. And then action would be, okay, what are we doing now? And now would be maybe within 30 days, just to give you some sort of timeline. So you're not thinking about action, oh, I'm going to do that in 6 months or 10 years, or it'll be my 48th priority. It's really just a way to sort of put some chronology and really sequencing to these steps in a really concrete way. And then maintenance is, okay, how are things working, right? And this is sort of our operations, our maintenance, our day-to-day admin. And then relapse, when the model was originally developed in the early 80s, 70s, relapse was, okay, maybe you pick smoking up. Or professionally speaking, maybe it's, okay, you got a new project. You have a new client. You have a new product that you have a new, you name it. And then it just continues. And if you look in the middle of the circle, you'll notice there's a spiral, and the spiral is basically acknowledging that things can repeat themselves. And so beyond that, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna go back and forth with turning my video on and off. I don't believe I can with the current technology that I have, and it might be a user issue, so I apologize. But from my perspective, in this sort of game of Corona hopscotch, we went from not knowing there was a problem, which is to say the global pandemic bearing down on us, in a really real, actionable way. People had talked about it in the beginning of 2020, January, February, a little bit, but it really was March where things happened very quickly. So I'm taking a little liberty with the model, but the idea is that this pre-contemplation phase really, went from 0 to action, and we hopscotch from 1 to 4 without these very important parts of contemplation, thinking about what's going on, and then preparing for the changes that we really would want to evaluate, vet, weigh, and then take action with eventually. And so why I think we still needed to be talking about this from a very early start, the early stage, if you will, in this model, is that we kind of skipped really important parts of them. And so now we're doing a lot of this, looking backwards, if you will, to make sure, did we miss anything? Is this good? Is it still working? And these are ongoing conversations. So my hope is that this model is something that you guys can all take into your conversations. The reason that's important segues into my next model. So I'm going to move the slide. That now what I've added, is the change model I just explained, which is by Prochaska et al. And this concept of sense making, which is another organizational psychology term. And I'll let you all read the definition there, but it's, effectively, it's how we see the world, both individually and then especially collectively. And these are, why we like stories and why stories are so rich and how we're so bound by them, is that we're constantly involved with making and reshaping them. And a few key concepts that I'm not an expert in this field, and I'm not going to embarrass myself, but a couple of concepts, in sense making that I think really stood out, and I think they're relevant to today's workplace, and really, not just the professional workspace, but the business of running a home, the business of any of your relationships. Your identity matters. How you see yourself, how you believe other people see you, is a big deal. Retrospection is not a one-time event. So you're looking backwards, trying to figure out what happened. How you look back on March of 2020 is different today than it was a year ago. We got a stop work order on March 17th, 2020. That felt a lot different on March, 28th or March 18th, 2020 than it did this year. That it's social and building a narrative, those are related, that there are people working together and creating the stories. And it's ongoing. And all that's to lead to is that we are, we're sense making right now. And so I'm trying to pull out the video, sorry about this. So I think that's a really crucial point, is that we are in the middle of, we're in the eye of a hurricane, and we're now trying to figure out what happened, what we're doing now, and what the future is like. And as a small business owner, I can tell you that this last year has been the most difficult. It was way more difficult than my first year. It was way more difficult than my business plan and prep and research and due diligence and all that stuff. It was, by an order of 100, order of magnitude, it was astonishing how much uncertainty there was a year ago from right now. And I still believe we're still wading our way through it. We've made sense of it as well as we can, but I think there's really more to this story. And the way forward is that, Katie will speak to a number of the issues that she's seeing that are really impactful. But I'm going to go back to my slide in a moment, my deck in a moment. And the idea is that we have this opportunity, and the pandemic happened. It's happening. We're still working on it, and we have this power to inform our future with it. And so I would recommend that, in fact, right now, it's a great time to be engaged, and it's a great time to be talking up and down the org chart, accessing support systems, being a support system. And I know we're all doing this, so let's not stop. And now what I'd like to do after sort of this, preliminary table setting, if you will, is I'd really like to take you just quickly 5-10 minutes through what we did as a company. And then we're going to take, I'll hand the reins over to Katie for a moment. And then I'm going to sort of conclude the conversation with a few tips that I think are being under assessed from a lot of managers, C-suite, small business owners, but decision makers, especially as the new normal continues to evolve. There is not a static new normal. It's evolving. And I think there are a few tips that I can share with regards to people's space and behavior in that space, especially with regards to hybrid teams, or teams that might be in the office a little bit, but teleworking, because that toothpaste has left the tube. And teleworking, one of the assumptions that I'm staking some professional chips on, as well as my reputation, as well as where I think the future is. Teleworking is not, it's only going to get bigger and more. So more jobs are going to convert to teleworking. And if you already are teleworking, you're going to be doing that more, up to and including entirely. And there are several reasons for that I'll touch on in a little bit. So I'm going to go back to my slides. Please forgive me for this.
I'm just going to take a moment to just ask you a quick question.
Okay.
So, Jim, you own a company that helps people with residential and commercial energy audits and efficiency improvements. And I think, like everyone who's attending today, you had to quickly transition your operations in order to respond to the pandemic. And it revealed some things to you that you're going to share with us in just a moment. So we'd love to hear kind of what happened, some of the things that you had to think about, and what you did because of it.
Yeah, so what happened was we immediately got, we knew the pandemic was coming. So we started to say, okay, people work from home and we'll see what happens. And then that was March 16th. It was literally in my office last week. The same sign is up, dated March 16, 2020. Please call, deliveries and so forth, visitors. This is how we're, maintaining social distance and, safeguards. We had to shut down. We shut down. We furloughed most of our staff. We had a little bit of attrition. One person left almost immediately. I suspect that may have been, sort of the final straw, if you will. Another person decided not to return to work for personal reasons that I, can't dispute. So we had some staffing issues right away. But then really what my main concern was is that I had the two processes and in order. It was by far, I was focused on the people that deliver the mission of our business, right? So the people became extremely important to me, on the personal level, of course. First, you're not going to help anybody if you're sick. You can't work if you're not well. I also care about our employees. We're a small business. We have 16 staff, and I care about them. And we were all uncertain. And we have staff who are vulnerable in different ways, and could use help in different ways. And I think they use work as a support system in a number of ways, which I love. I'm a big fan of that. I think that's something you can get with a small business. I think you can get it with the big business too. It really depends on the manager at that point. But as we shut down, we ended up we did a lot with communicating with our employees to say, how do you feel? Tell me, and I'm listening, and having a lot of space for those conversations, Dana. And then on top of that, it was, what can I count on? And it was very collaborative. It was very mutual. I was very conscious of the idea that I could be creating stress or creating problems by asking questions. Like there are certain things I need to know, right? I need to know who can do what, and like that's how I, sort of put the X's and O's on paper and strategize and prognosticate. But just getting that sort of baseline, just that sort of an affect check. And that was really hard. And people were scared for months, and not a little scared. I mean, like really, really scared for themselves, their kids, their parents, their distant relations who had underlying conditions before we really knew what was going on with this. This was Ebola a year ago, as far as everybody knew. And we forget that really quickly because we make sense of we incorporate new information. But if you do that, time travel, people were really scared. And so what we did on top of checking in with our people, Dana, is that we changed our processes. There's nobody at our office. Like, not never, but my CFO goes in to water the plants, grab mail, and that's about it. I think we're going to start to return to the office a little bit. We haven't yet had those final conversations, but it's going to look, realistically, it's looking at 2 or 3 days a week in the office. There is a certain velocity we get in the office with communication in particular. That's been extremely helpful, and that's been a lesson learned for us, is that the office still has a place. It's different, and that I think it'll be a lot more organized and a little bit more intentional usage of our office, as opposed to being the default place people go to work. I just don't see that happening. And to take a step back, and I think I spoke to this a little bit, but the nature of our business is really complex in that we do contracting in the field, of course, we do consulting in the office, on site, at other people's businesses and homes, and we have a warehouse, we have a flex space, we have office space, and so we really sort of bridge that white collar, blue collar, in office field, a lot of those sort of chasms. And I can tell you, everywhere I look, nobody's going back to what they had a year ago. A buddy of mine, who's an attorney in Massachusetts, spent February working from Disneyland or Disney World in Florida, and then stopped by my house on the drive back home. His family flew. He drove back up 95 with the dog, and we were chatting. He's an attorney, like I said, they have a pretty big office, and he's like, yeah, one guy just told us he had already moved to North Carolina, and everyone just sort of shrugged and said, okay, big deal. Which is just mind blowing to me, in that, I'm pretty old school. I'm 45, and my dad, I came from the generation of, like, my dad was recommending get a degree, get a job, stay there for 35, 40 years, be happy. And that is so antiquated. And it just immediately got even older in the last year, because so much of the of knowledge, or anything that can be telework, is very likely going to be telework, in my opinion. I really want to move in, because I knew I was going to talk too much, that I already am. But I want to show you a little bit of what we did and some of the things that worked. And then I want to make sure that Katie can speak. And then if we have a little bit of time, I really want to show you sort of a do's and don'ts around what we're seeing with working from home. There are a lot of different ways that working from home is going to work for everybody and work really well. And there are certain ways that can be dangerous, unproductive, or otherwise deleterious to working together professionally. And I'll speak to that a little bit. But I do want to bring back this share. Excuse me. And can you guys see my slides, or are you looking at me? I'm sorry.
I'm looking at two of myself, which is a lot, so.
I'm sorry. Let's go back to this one more time. Better?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a recap to what we just did. And if you look at the second set of bullets, we wanted to include everyone. That was sort of key. People like what they help to create. That's another key point that I've learned as a manager. I'm a good geek. I'm the manager who is a really good nerd and then kind of nerded his way up the org chart. I'm not a very I would not consider myself an extremely relational person, and I will tell you that when you invite people to contribute, they feel respected, acknowledged, respected. They tend to bring their best. And you learn stuff. And the other thing that I learned, which was a surprise to me, is that when I ask enough people, and it's usually not very many, 3, 4, 5 people, the same question or questions about the same topic, there tends to be an astonishing amount of coherence that comes into play, or alignment of ideas that really emerge. And you just talk to people and they, ask 10 people and 9 people say the same thing. That's the thing you want to hold on to. And so I think there's a real value in including everyone, and then and thanking them for it, honoring their contributions. One additional way we honor contributions that's a little outside the scope of what I just mentioned is that sometimes people come up with a good idea, it's the wrong time, or a good idea and it costs infinity dollars. For good ideas we can't work with right away, we don't, circular file them right away. We put them in, a virtual, quote unquote, parking lot. And the idea with that is it's a repository. It's a library of good ideas we can access so that people don't feel swatted down and we don't lose the idea. So it basically solicits future contribution on top of, a pat on the back to begin with. And then, oh yeah, by the way, you don't lose that knowledge. I have here that we track data, and the way we did that is a few ways, but we have a really good idea of what people's productivity should be, so that if they're deviating far from it, we sort of know without micromanaging them. And that's something that I also strongly encourage. The way we do that, or keys to success for that, are that we spend a lot of time developing what the roles and responsibilities we need are in our future staff. That's a collaborative conversation. People feel empowered when they're asked. You can't magic wand empowerment for somebody, but you can ask them questions that sort of acknowledge their dignity and their value to the company, and they're almost always very eager to help out, and they love being heard. And so for me, the tracking the data part, it really is we just use our dashboard. So when we hire somebody, hey, this is what we're looking for. This is what we're going to be asking of you. This is what you're going to be evaluated on. And then it's explicit. No, there's no ambiguity about what's expected. And then it's, okay, I see you're doing this. Great, attaboy, you get a raise. Or, hey, I see you're doing this. Here's some opportunities for improvement. That's our manager's job, is not to micromanage. It's to support people to execute and succeed and feel valued. And so understanding what that throughput should be is very important from a high level. In terms of day-to-day, if we aren't a micromanagement, a small family-run business can't be super micromanagey. We just don't have the revenue to have, unnecessary supervisors, or redundant supervisors, I should say. As far as the new normal for me as a CEO, retention, I do not want to hire. I do not want to have to hire. If I hire, I want to do it because we're growing, as this indication that, the economy, as far as I'm concerned, is turned around. Telework's happening. They're home a lot more. I asked my CFO very quickly, if you look towards the middle, our utility bills at the office have dropped over 50%. I know, because this is our bailiwick. I tell people how to save money on their utility bills. Businesses or homes, a lot of lighting retrofits, insulation, sort of mundane things that really add up, both for bills, the environment, comfort, health, safety, building durability, and so forth. That's a huge percentage. So I've got all this budget left over there, and I basically put that utility demand on my employees. And I know that. So we're going to come up with something clever to make it, worth their while, whether that's some sort of utility stipend. We do lighting retrofits naturally, so their bills are pretty low, or should be anyway. We had a pretty good commuter benefit, including mileage, so that you didn't have to go into debt, or so to speak, to get to work. But our commuting benefits, so smart cards and stuff for Metro, like that, there is none. And then my needs for commercial space have also plummeted. And so this is probably outside of the, the jurisdiction or bailiwick of, most of the folks on the org chart. But I will tell you that there's somebody who has to plan for facilities or pay the rent, and they realize that, for us, we have about a 3,000 square foot place. I need less than a third of that for warehousing stuff, and I need zero of it for staff. So the commercial real estate market is going to change a lot. The reason I mention it is that if you're working from home and your bills are going up, or if you have a home, issue with your home, or a really uncomfortable chair, or whatever it might be, there may be budget for that. And I would encourage you even that if you have a company that has a wellness program or has maybe discussed some of these things or how we can help or reach out, let them know what your home office is actually like. Why that might be in their interest is the following two bullets. I've seen a lot of different, you could see with mine, online, brand management, what you look like online. Is it professional? Do you know, is the, what's in the background? Do you have good internet speed? And then the IEQ stands for indoor environmental quality. A lot of homes make people sick, and you're going to have problems with retention or absenteeism or productivity. And so it's in your interest to be talking to your supervisees, to your remote workers, to say, hey, what's happening here? This was my home office, right? So you can see the baby's crib. Our son Liam is 14 months, but this was, about a year ago. So it's doubling as a nursery, a little bit of a library, an office, garage. It's embarrassing to show this slide, but that's what we were doing. And that was our home office. And then I'm going to pass it over to Katie in just a second. And I don't know, Katie, if you can unmute yourself and just speak to it, or if you'd want to go to video. But let me try this.
Yeah.
Does this work okay?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be really brief here. Jim invited me to speak to sort of my expertise as we're talking about, this new working environment where, so many of us are either, working remotely full-time or part-time. And even as things return somewhat back to, quote unquote normal, that there's still, as Jim said, going to be quite a bit of, hybrid type situations that we have to navigate and plan for. And so I'm going to just speak very briefly to the people side of that from my experience, and just briefly talk about these are sort of, I could talk about this for a whole week. There's so much here that we could talk about that I think is important. So Jim gave me 5 minutes. So I'm going to try and these are my sort of 5 best tips of things that managers, leaders, people with influence in organizations should have in the front of your mind, particularly right now. And actually, Jim, can you stop sharing screen for a little bit? I think it would help me just to see people. And talk for a little bit, since it's sort of a static image on the screen here. So, as you heard in my bio, the work that I do is with people and organizations, including my work for the Center for Leadership and Organizational Change at the University of Maryland. And one of the things we do is leadership development and professional development. And we have seen, demand in particular for our manager training programs. And particularly, we developed a new program this year for sort of managing teams, hybrid or remote teams, that has just like demand is going through the roof. So I think, people are hungry to talk about this, because we all, there's so much uncertainty, so much ambiguity. We're still learning a lot about what's most effective as we go, but there's a lot we know already about what's effective and what's not effective. What I would say from my perspective, obviously I'm biased since this is the work that I do, but from my perspective, one of the most important things you can do right now as a manager is attend to the relationships between people on your team, between you and your team, between people on your team, and to the people themselves. And I'll tell you, in the work that I do, the organizations that are doing this, that are making this a priority, are doing much better than those who are not attending to this. And it takes more effort now. It has to be a little bit more intentional, because those opportunities for casual connection and casual conversations have disappeared for the moment. And so it's not something that we can just sort of, wait until we get back to pick back up again. It's something we have to really attend to. So my 5 quick tips are related to that in terms of how do we make people a priority, as particularly when you're in a management position, when you're sort of in charge of a group of people in some way, shape, or form. Number 1, be intentional about showing appreciation and recognizing people for their contributions. So one of the most basic human needs we have is to feel like we matter. We want to show up to work, feel seen, feel valued and appreciated for what we contribute on a very basic level, sort of basic human needs. It's how we're hardwired. And again, that's something that's harder to do when we're not in the same space. We're in our little office or kitchen table or folding table in a nursery or wherever we might be, clicking away on our computer, many of us, if that's the kind of work we do. And it's easy to just sort of get in our own zone with the blinders on and not take the time to reach out to folks and tell them that we see them, tell them that they are valued and appreciated. If you are doing this well, you can't do too much of it. And it's funny, just a few hours ago, early this morning, I was leading a session that specifically was about effective praise and recognition. And this is something we talked a lot about, because I think people think like there's such a thing as too much appreciation or too much recognition, which I believe is not true, as long as you're doing it well. If it's sincere and it's specific feedback, if you're not just saying thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you to check it off the list, if you're actually giving people sincere and specific positive feedback, you can't do too much of it, particularly right now, since people are carrying so much. Small things can have a big impact, and this costs nothing in terms of money and resources. So it's one of your best tools. 2, and I'll go a little faster here. Negotiate work plans. And Jim spoke to this a little bit when he talked about what Elysian did. But we're in a situation now where people have very different needs. Some people are at home trying to manage remote school for small children while working. Others are, in different situations or taking care of parents or able to work really well with no distraction. So people are in lots of different situations, are going to have different needs, and different types of resources that they need to be made available. So having conversations, and it needs to be an actual conversation. So asking, genuinely being interested in and curious about the answers people have, and listening to what they say they need right now, what kind of support they need in terms of equipment, physical space, which I know Jim will speak to, schedule, how are we going to communicate, what's expected, all of those things, and being flexible enough to understand that, this next bullet down, ensure equity, that every person is getting the resources and support they need, which doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's getting the same support and resources. It means that you have an understanding of each individual person, what their specific situation and needs are, and that you're addressing those needs. And that everyone has the opportunity to do that negotiation and have those conversations, that it's not just the people who are loudest or who are asking for it that are getting response and attention from you. Managing performance, the next one. So show appreciation, negotiate work plans with people individually, ensure equity as you're doing that. Manage performance by shifting your thinking. And what I mean by this is trust rather than track, which is a nice way of saying, please don't micromanage people, especially right now. If you have done a good job about negotiating a work plan for people so that you are on the same page and have a mutual understanding of what's expected, when people are going to work, how their schedule is going to work, how you're going to communicate, once you have done that, trusting people to do what they said they're going to do instead of constantly checking in or requiring them to work between certain hours or requiring them to pick up the phone every single second, every single time you call right away, no matter where they are, goes a long way in terms of keeping that relationship strong. And then lastly is sort of an umbrella for all of these, but it's important to mention is creating human connection, creating space for that. So attending to that yourself. And if you're in a position to do so as someone in leadership, creating space for others to do that with each other. So allowing people time to build and nurture relationships, to connect as human beings, not just as coworkers, because when people have a chance to do that and strengthen those relationships or attend to the ones that already are there, they do better work and they'll stay longer and they'll be more engaged and they'll be more productive and all of those things. People are carrying a lot right now, and they really need to feel, a part of something and connected and seen. And that's one of the ways you can do that, particularly by modeling it yourself, modeling some of that, that you prioritize that, and that you can sort of be vulnerable and sharing some of yourself too. So I know I went over my 5 minutes, but hopefully that's just, like I said, like the tip of the iceberg in terms of what I think we should be thinking about in terms of people and relationships. But hopefully that was enough to feel useful.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. So everybody, what I was trying to say, just listen to Katie, because she knows what she's talking about all the time.
I think you both brought incredible value to this conversation. What I appreciated about the things that you talked about, Jim, was you presented a case study for us in things that leaders should be thinking about in moving forward. You identified what the problems were as your team started to go in different directions, and then talked us through some of the changes that you made so that you would come back together and figure out a way to have a path forward. What I really appreciated about what Katie brought to the conversation was the expertise in understanding the people side, but you have also said a lot about why it's really important to understand and to value the people side, because most of us can't do the work that we're doing without that human capital. So if we ignore the importance of that, it's to the detriment of the work that we're doing every day. So I was really excited about this conversation because I knew that there were specific pieces that you were both going to bring to it. We have about 13 minutes left. I want to open up the floor for anybody that might have any questions as people are thinking through that. Jim, there's some very specific things that you talked about that people should think about if they're going to have a continued environment of working from home, because many of us, we took whatever we had from our desks in March of 2020, and we've just been making it work for the last year. So maybe if you could share with us a couple of things for us to be intentional and thinking about for moving forward.
Yes. So the one resource that we accessed repeatedly was the Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM, shrm.org. If y'all aren't on that as a small business owner or even manager, I couldn't recommend that website any more highly. It's a nonprofit, it's a professional group. They had so many resources. I think it was like $200 a year, and it would have saved me a lot more money than that, because they had a lot of templates and things to work with. But in terms of what's happening, so that's like the one thing I wanted to say. Like, I found that to be personally extremely, just a really rich repository of a ton of information. If you don't have access to, an advisor, that they're your advisor for $200, which is great. As far as what we're seeing, one of my stars, she's an employee. She's been with me for 10 years. She's great. I'm a big fan of her. She challenges me in awesome ways all the time, in frustratingly awesome ways. But she's been very clear. She's like, I've gotten 10 hours of my week back every week, which is which is a long time. That's 12, roughly 12 person weeks worth of 40-hour equivalent. From a moral perspective, I am not going to ask her to come back to the office for 40 hours a week. It's just not going to happen. So now I need to figure out, okay, well, how's your internet? How do you look on a Zoom call? Not only like internet speed, which is important. Obviously, Maryland's a pretty good state for internet speed, generally speaking. I've checked to make sure. But beyond that, do you like your space? Do you need a desk? For this woman, her name's Sunita. Actually, she was a emerging leader graduate from a few years ago. Sunita, for any of you who may remember her. She's like, oh yeah, I want an adjustable desk. She's like, because I like to. We used to do walking meetings. Was part of our culture. For our check-ins, we'd go for a 15 to 45-minute walk around the neighborhood where we are. Our headquarters are in Laurel now, but they were in Silver Spring. And so I'm like, okay, how much is that? you know, she looked up a few options and said, oh, I think I really like this one. It's a few $100. That's gonna make you happy? Yep, I get to stand up. I get to, you know, I get to adjust my levels, which there's the whole, if you haven't already, you probably looked up how to look professional on a Zoom call. There's some tips on that as well. Which, you know, she sold me on it and I bought. I was like, okay, great. You're gonna be happy. You're gonna stay. You'll look more professional. It's in my interest. And you can stretch your legs every now and then and still click clack and all the rest of it. Like, no problem. We already did a phone, like a telecom stipend, but that would be something else I know is going to happen. I haven't personally gotten asked yet about utility expenses. That might be something I proactively introduce, really just to sort of control it, quite frankly, just so I can say, okay, we're up, you know, we know your bills went up. We estimate this stuff. We know what the bills are likely to be and percent differences. So just to take the edge off of that, I have one employee who has 3, you know, boys who are like 8, 10, and 12, right? And this person's at home and with the boys, and it was crazy. Like, we're on the phone, like we can hear, see the school, all this stuff's going on, life's going on. I was like, how can I help you? It's in my interest to help her a lot. And just purely from a business standpoint, just nuts and bolts capitalist standpoint. On top of it, I love her. I think she's great. I like her. I want her to do well, and I care for her and her family. So, you know, like, that to me is a no-brainer. So in terms of getting office, you know, supplies, printers, paper, you know, ink is really expensive. You know, like, you're probably burning through more ink. I really, for my other sort of, there are a couple of like executive groups I'm a member of. I strongly encourage everybody who will listen to open up your wallet as much as, you know, to the degree you're able. But odds are, as these things have changed, your utility bills went like that. Your need for office space has stayed the same or almost certainly gone down. So if you've been able to make that into black ink, not red, use some of that money to take care of your people. Because for me, and I'm just speaking, I mean, we're in actually a hiring phase right now anyway, and it's hard, and that's just to grow. And to get back to where we were, if I were talking about retention, I mean, then the numbers go from, you know, a few $100, $1,000 per employee to thousands of dollars in my interest to keep somebody happy. Because for our company, it takes, you know, a new hire 3 months to, you know where the kitchen is. So, you know, that's a big deal. You know, beyond that, the other thing that I'd be really remiss if I didn't mention is that if your company's big enough, you may need to keep an OSHA log because slips, trips, and falls are still worker compable, even if they're at home. I didn't know that until I was plumbing the depths of the SHRM website and said, yes, if you work for a big enough company where you have a log, where you have to log, it's a regulatory, it's a requirement. That was a big one where I was like, whoa, OSHA's not going to, they actually had a position paper put out last February, coincidentally enough, saying, we will never come look at your home office. So that's never going to happen. But from a risk management perspective, we don't have to keep a home log, but if we did, we have to keep one on the truck. If we had to keep one at home or in the office, because we were a certain size, it would happen. The other thing that is huge about being at home, I mentioned this, I touched on this very briefly at home. People aren't comfortable at home. Homes make people sick. We live in a beautiful area with a lot of old homes. If your home's pre-1978, it's got lead paint in it. I can bet on it. I would bet my reputation on it. So there's ways to look for that. The comfort issue is huge. Radon is something that took my Aunt Joan, and she was the cleanest clean liver I ever knew, but she never had her house tested until it was way too late. So there are a bunch of things that industrial hygienist or home appraiser or evaluator, if you're wondering where to find somebody like this, please reach out to Leadership Montgomery. I'm sure they have a good network of folks who can help you out. But those are some of the hidden messages that I found that, like, health and safety is really huge. You don't think of that. Like, my employees, like, at home, until Sunita had mentioned it, I was like, oh, the standing desk. Yeah, that's in my interest. chairs. Are they using the folding chairs from the garage that they use in Thanksgiving? Because what's going to happen is the eye strain. Every place is underlit. Every place. My room right here is underlit because I have the light meter that shows me that. So what's going to continue to happen is that people are going to get eye strain, carpal tunnel. You're going to look wonky on Zoom and all the rest of it. And what I would leave you with is that with SHRM, with asking around, with accessing LM and their support system, and really their next these series of conversations. If you haven't looked at them, like I'm coming to the one on resilience. I could use that. So I would say email Allison, email Dana, but access support, because almost make people sick. They might tarnish your brand. If they lead to retention, they're going to up your prices a lot. And so with a little bit of intentionality, my belief is that we can sort of go back to stages 2 and 3 about contemplation and planning to really do this the right way, so that going forward, our work-life balance is much easier. And really, it's not going to look the same for everyone, but to Katie's point earlier, it'll be equitable so that people are getting what they need. And if you're a business, you need employees to serve the mission to deliver what you do. And it's humane, and it's moral, and you'll sleep better. And we don't have to, we get to. So that's sort of my philosophy on it. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, you're great. There was a question in the chat. You talked a little bit earlier about a parking lot library for good ideas. That might not be appropriate to talk about at the time of the current conversation. How does your company organize and manage those parking lot ideas?
That's a wonderful question. So what we do in our departmental meetings, and then we also have a leadership team meeting, is that is part of our agenda. And in fact, one of the documents that I'd be willing to share with Leadership Montgomery if they want to distribute it is a very hard, I don't want to say hard fought, but we did a focus group internally to figure out what we do well and what we don't do well. And I've led hundreds of meetings, and a lot of them are bad, and not all of them. And so we created a how to run an effective meeting. And there are 4 questions that basically it all boils down to this in terms of being a high performing team. You got to know who's doing what support is needed so they can do it, a timeline, and then how they report back so everybody knows it's done. If you have answers to all 4 of those questions, you're in really good shape. So as part of this document, the manager, whoever's calling the meeting, whoever's running the meeting, literally sets up a physical space. So on the whiteboard, we literally carve out a quarter of the whiteboard, big Post-it note. We literally will just have an extra one that says parking lot, or if it's digital, we'll put it into an Excel spreadsheet. Then it's just an extra tab, and we just say parking lot ideas. And every now and then we mine it. Every now and then, we're like, oh, we're all caught up. That's a bad feeling to have, like you're never done. So then it's okay, let's see what we could be, what was a good idea, but not for that point in time, but still worth hanging on to. So you have to be active about managing that. And then what I would say if you're new to it is maybe put in a monthly reminder to look at a parking lot, just to make sure you're not dropping anything, because that's a good way to make people feel excluded or ignored. So that's
great. So we started a couple of minutes after 12, so I'm hoping it's okay with everybody that we go to like 1:03, because we had I thought it was 2 questions, but now it looks like it's 1 question, because Veronica had her hand up, but then she said Lynn asked the question. Lynn, do you want to unmute yourself, or would you like me to ask your question for you?
I'll be happy to ask it. So Katie talked about giving employees space to connect with each other. And I would love to hear some really specific ways that you have done, or that you've heard others have done that well, when we're all distributed and so sick of Zoom calls. Thank you. This is a good session.
Yeah, that's such a great question, Lynn. It's something that even my team, in our center is struggling with too. Like Zoom fatigue is a real thing. And for many people, we spend a good chunk of our days, sitting in front of the camera. one resource that I'll come back to that at the end. I'll answer your question first, and then I'll mention a resource about Zoom specifically that's been helpful for us. So I think something that I've seen a lot of organizations do that does require being on Zoom, but it has worked for a lot of teams that I've talked to, is scheduling times to get together. Some people do make them optional, some people make them, required. But like basically putting a time on people's calendars to get together where you're doing something other than talking about work. And sometimes it's just, my boss started doing this thing once a week where she said, I'm going to be having coffee with my Zoom on from 10 to 11 on Friday. Anyone who's free at any point during that hour can pop on for the whole time or for 5 minutes. The only rule is that we don't talk about work. So like we get on and people can just chat. And if they only have 10 minutes, they can pop on and say hi and then pop off. So it makes, even though there's this, sense of Zoom fatigue, making it a little bit more informal, making it less agenda driven, setting the expectation really clearly that this is a time to talk about things other than work, I think can make the Zoom fatigue not quite be as heavy on people. Other things that I've heard, and sometimes it's a happy hour, sometimes it's coffee. I talked to one team that was actually, this was a team that is a much more structured group of people in general. So this worked for them. It might not work for every team, but they once a month had like an afternoon where they did a game together. Like there are sites you can go to and play like online board games through Zoom, which really worked for them. Again, it might not be for everyone, but so I think there's different ways to create space via video call that are less structured and that are less taxing. A couple other thoughts are carving a little bit of time out of meetings that are already on people's calendars can also have a big impact. So you're not asking for additional time for people, but for instance, if you have a weekly staff meeting, can you take 10 minutes of that meeting and give people a chance to sort of just check in about how your weekend was, or share one thing you're looking forward to this week, or share something you appreciate about someone else on your team, which also helps build those relationships. And it doesn't take very long, and it also doesn't add to people's schedule. So to the extent you're able to sort of add just a little bit of time in to meetings that you already have on the calendar. And the other thing I would add, just in terms of specific suggestion, is what can you do that doesn't require Zoom, which I know is trickier now, right? So like, what can you do via email? Can you say like, is there a way you can implement, weekly shout outs or something? So, Friday, and you could, as the leader, there was one person I worked with who said that every Friday he carved out, 15 minutes of his day to think about, what did I see someone do this week or hear about this week that I really appreciated and I want to sort of honor. And he would, send an email out with just a few notes about that. And maybe that could be an expectation that that's the time for everyone to do that. Or, what can you do in terms of, modeling what you want others to see, like do something that creates more of a culture of appreciation that allows for interaction, but doesn't require people to sort of be on video. So that's just off the top of my head. I think there are great resources that have other suggestions like that. The thing I mentioned about Zoom, and I'll have to dig this up, but Dana, I can send this to you. There was a great article that came out a few months ago about Zoom fatigue that had some really concrete tips about how to make Zoom meetings themselves a little bit less fatiguing. And I know it really helped us in our work, so I'm happy to share the link to that.
That'd be great. Thank you. See, if we had scheduled this for 90 minutes, nobody would have signed up because everybody would have said this is way too much time on Zoom. But I want to thank Jim and Katie for your time this afternoon. This was wonderful, and I hope that everybody who logged in got some notes, some things to think about, and moving forward. This was a very unique conversation with a CEO, because we had two, because of some of the topics that we talked about, and because, as I mentioned earlier, it is kicking off a series for us here at LM. So we have 3 additional parts that will take place in April. April 8th is resiliency. April 15th is health and values-based leadership. And then we'll cap it off on April 22nd with new business models. And all of this is done as kind of an entryway to get people thinking about some of the things that will be discussed at our inaugural conference, the Lead Forum, which is on June 11th. We're always trying to think of ways to support you all in your continued leadership, and making sure that we're talking about things that are relevant and timely to what we're all going through. I lied. I went past 1:03. I'm very sorry. I want to thank everybody for their time this afternoon. It was wonderful to see you all. We are starting to think about what those in-person experiences will look like, and when we can return to those. So please stay tuned. We'll have some announcements about that soon. Again, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Katie. I'll get with them to see what resources we can send to everybody that participated this afternoon. Thank you all. We'll see you soon.